coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Who gets to shape the values of our children, the state or the parent?
The state has a duty to protect children from the wacky beliefs of their parents.
Parents have a duty to protect children against the tyranny of the state.
You paint the state to be this potential tyrant, and you're right that it can be. Parents are also potential tyrants.
Our guest is Rob Reich, co-editor of Education, Justice, and Democracy.
Education, compulsory attendance laws really are a massive intrusion on the liberty of parents, on family life. But I think that there's a third interest at stake, and the third interest is the independent interest, the independent standing of the child.
Education and the culture wars, coming up on Philosophy Talk.
This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We are coming to you from the Marsh Theater, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance.
Our thinking originates down the road at Stanford University. That's where Ken and I teach philosophy.
Welcome, everyone, to Philosophy Talk. And today, we're philosophizing about education and the culture wars.
Well, Ken, it's sad in a way. I mean, traditionally, America's system of free public education has been a source of great pride. It's a source of upward mobility, the kind of thing that's most characteristic of America. But now those schools are becoming a hotbed of controversy, a part of the culture wars. Should they teach children about sex and birth control? Is teaching evolution as an established scientific fact somehow encroaching on the religious neutrality enshrined in the Constitution?
Which raises a good question, John. Who actually has the right to choose what our young people are taught about these controversial issues?
Well, I think the answer is pretty straightforward, maybe even obvious. It's basically the parents' responsibility to see that their children get the important things in life, including an education. We have public schools as an optional and affordable way for parents to discharge that responsibility.
John, you're such a traditionalist. I'm surprised. I mean, the traditional view is that public schools should be as neutral as possible, leave the controversy to the dinner table and Sunday school. Parents who want, say, religiously infused education, they can send their kids to schools run by churches, synagogues, or mosques, or they can choose a private school that reflects their sectarian attitude, or they, if they want, they can teach their children at home, but just leave the controversy out of the public schools.
That's sort of the view I favor, I guess. I mean, to adapt a thought from Churchill's analysis of democracy, letting parents have the basic say in the education of their children may be a terrible system, fraught with problems, but there isn't any alternative that isn't worse.
Well, John, but let's test this. What if the parents don't want their children educated at all? Would that be all right by you?
Well, I think that's a red herring, Ken. I mean, an analogy. It's the parents' job to provide their children with nutrition, with enough to eat. That doesn't mean they have the right to starve them. Children have a right to be fed, and they have a right to be educated. The community also has a responsibility. It has to see that parents fulfill their responsibilities, and that usually involves making attendance at a public school mandatory unless the parents have some other alternative that they provide. I must say, this all seems pretty reasonable to me.
I don't know. Let's test this. Do parents have the right to determine the total content of their children's education by your light?
Well, total is a kind of a funny word. I mean, if parents teach their kids that 2 + 2 is 5, or that English sentences are read from right to left, that's not education, that's child abuse. So there are clearly limits.
But what limits? I mean, what if the parents want to teach that evolution isn't science, but just secular superstition? Or they want to teach that God insists that women be subservient, or that the white race is superior to all others? Are those within the limits you're talking about?
Well, most parents want their children to thrive and do well. They don't want to teach them stuff that's off the wall, and if they believe stuff that's off the wall, so be it. Some parents teach their kids pretty nonsensical things. But over the years, public schools have often taught pretty nonsensical things too. It's like Churchill says, the costs of taking away the right to teach nonsense from parents outweigh the dangers. In Germany, for example, the state is so all-powerful when it comes to education that if you want to homeschool your kids, no matter how good a job you do, even if you don't teach them anything controversial, you can still end up in jail. We don't want that here in America.
John, I have to tell you, I think you're vastly underestimating the power of parents to actually do harm to their children. The state owes it to children to actually protect them from their parents.
Well, it's true that the state certainly has to protect children from their parents if their parents are really harming them in some terrible way, but I'm not sure that teaching them nonsense counts as that. I mean, look, I rejected my parents' republicanism and Episcopalianism. My kids reject pretty much most of my liberal, secular, hippie values. Kids are very resilient. Wait and see. Your son Kiyoshi may turn out to be an existentialist or a cricket player.
Gee, John, don't get me started on Kiyoshi. Look, let's leave that aside. But look, the state has a right to shape kids into citizens. It has an absolute right to do that. And why should we expect parents to even care about that, let alone be expert at doing it? I mean, think of all the things you need to teach kids. A commitment to universal human dignity, an appreciation of human diversity, an understanding of our history. All these things are required of people if they're going to be effective citizens in a democracy like ours.
When I hear you talk this way, I'm reminded of the civics classes I used to go to, which were, of course, just a way of giving the football coach something to do during the day. I think of Paul Simon's lyric, when I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all.
Oh, John, look, to illustrate how intense the culture wars can get, we sent our roving philosophical reporter, Caitlin Esch, to a small beachside community in Southern California where the culture wars are raging in an elementary school. She files this report.
Encinitas, California is a coastal city north of San Diego of about 60,000 people. It has long attracted surfers, yoga practitioners, healers, and seekers, so it's a little surprising it's also the backdrop of a battle that's playing out in elementary schools across the city.
Tonight, parents packed in Encinitas Union School District boardroom, not upset over bond measures or school funding, but yoga.
A lot of criticism lobbed. There have been some nasty attacks, I think, for both sides.
David Peck has a son in the second grade. He says when the yoga classes came to the elementary schools in late 2012, it completely divided the district into those who support yoga and those who consider it religious indoctrination.
Parents who were very afraid of the program, I think, have felt cornered and have snapped back, and parents who perceive the yoga opponents as closed-minded have been vicious as well.
Peck is a partner at Coast Law Group in Encinitas, and he represents about 150 pro-yoga families. The twice-weekly yoga classes are part of a broader health and wellness program funded by a grant from the Joyce Foundation, a group that promotes a style of yoga called Ashtanga. Dave Peck says the classes have taught the kids how to calm themselves.
I could see it in my child's face and the relaxation of his body, that when he performs the yoga moves, the control he has over his body, for an 8-year-old, it's just remarkable.
But then a group of parents sued the district and the superintendent, claiming the yoga classes are religious indoctrination. In a press release, a lawyer for the parents called Ashtanga yoga inherently and pervasively religious.
We think that that's a very fearful, closed-minded, almost conspiracy theorist viewpoint, and we reject it outright.
Peck was one of hundreds of parents who flooded a series of school board meetings as the yoga debate came to a boil.
It was intended to help put some folks' fears at ease. Unfortunately, it seemed to simply fan the flames here.
The anti-yoga families are represented by Dean Broyles, the president of the National Center for Law and Policy, a nonprofit Christian legal defense fund. Broyles declined to be interviewed for this story because he says he's been burned by reporters in the past, but he did put out a statement.
The stated goal of the Joyce Foundation is to promote the gospel of Ashtanga, a deeply religious form of yoga worldwide. Students on at least 2 campuses have done their yoga practices with pictures on the wall of the 8-limbed spiritual path, whose ultimate goal is absorption into the universal.
Broyles claims the case is a clear example of, quote, the state trampling the religious freedom rights of citizens, unquote. Because if Bible study isn't allowed in schools, some argue, neither should yoga. David Peck says comparing yoga to Bible study is utterly ridiculous. Bible study clearly favors one religion over others.
Yoga, on the other hand, is something that's practiced by folks of all different religions, folks who believe in God and those who don't. So there is a clear black and white difference between Bible study and practicing yoga.
At a recent court date, even the judge admitted he practices yoga, though he also admitted he does not know what a sun salutation is. For Philosophy Talk, I'm Caitlin Esch.
I'm John Perry, along with my fellow philosopher at Stanford, Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the Marsh Theater in San Francisco.
Our guest today is a professor of political science and ethics in society at Stanford University. He's co-editor of Education, Justice, and Democracy. Please welcome Rob Reich.
Rob, you're a distinguished, if young, political scientist. You're so distinguished that we made you a member of the philosophy department.
It's incredible.
Now you're writing essays about homeschooling. What led you to this remote corner of the interesting field of political philosophy?
Shortly after I graduated with a philosophy degree as an undergraduate, I participated in a program that lots of people know about today. It wasn't so well known then, called Teach for America. I got shipped off to Houston, Texas, where I taught 6th grade, and then went off to graduate school in philosophy afterwards. But while I was teaching 6th grade, I got caught up in all kinds of questions about what the purpose of schooling is, why we spend so much public money on it, why we have compulsory attendance laws. And homeschooling was then a growing phenomenon and represents the apex of parental authority over schooling.
The U.S. Constitution doesn't even use the word education. Of course, it didn't mention the income tax either.
Doesn't say anything about the Air Force in addition.
Right. So leaving aside the Air Force and that dismal topic of the income tax, it looks like our founding fathers didn't think that education was the state's business. But now, even though I guess the federal government still feels it shouldn't take too active a part in education, apart from research, state governments, local governments really see education as their business. When and how did this change in American thinking come about?
Yeah, well, publicly funded education and compulsory school attendance laws weren't present at the founding of the country. Thomas Jefferson and a few other founding fathers were big proponents of it, but it really didn't start to the mid-19th century and then didn't become solidified and spread on across the country until the early part of the 20th century. So it's a relatively new thing.
But what made people do this relatively new thing? What was that all about?
The idea was that the economy and society was changing in such a way that kids needed different skills and different competencies in order to be independent citizens. And in addition, there were massive waves of immigration, and the children of the immigrants needed to be Americanized. So there was a civic purpose to forcing them to go to school.
So this point of view Ken was pushing was really not just in his philosophical mind, but historically important. We got all these Irish kids and German kids coming in, and they need to learn the way we think about things.
Got to put them in the melting pot. If we talked forthrightly about we need to eliminate the ethnicity that you came with to the country in order to make you into a full-blooded American, it would be a very different story.
Another historical factual question. Was there resistance to this wave of nationalizing the immigrant population, Americanizing the immigrant population? Or people say, oh, yeah, that's right, you go ahead and do that?
Not massive resistance of the kind there would be today. The resistance was more about the incursion into parental authority rather than about their home country in some way. I mean, the thing that I think is important to keep in mind here, education, compulsory attendance laws, really are a massive intrusion on the liberty of parents, on family life. A law that says you shall now send your child Monday through Friday from 9 to 3 o'clock for 180 days a year to a school in which you don't have authority over what happens in it, that's a big deal.
This is Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the Marsh Theater in San Francisco. We're talking about education and the culture wars with Rob Reich from Stanford University.
In our next segment, we'll ask, what's the bigger worry? Innocent children indoctrinated by the all-powerful state? Or wacko parents depriving their children of what well-functioning states need all of its citizens to know?
Wacko parents, tyrannical states, and the culture wars, along with questions from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
woodpeckers drill. Snakes are not birds, all you scientists chill. Study Bibleology.
Thanks to our musical guests, the Playtones. This is Philosophy Talk, and I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is political scientist Rob Reich, and we're talking about education and the culture wars.
Should parents be the ones to choose what their children are taught about controversial issues? Join the discussion by stepping up to the microphone in front of the stage.
So, Rob, for every parent, there are lots of things that they don't want their children taught in school. Lots of things. To what extent do you think they have the right to shield their children from what they take to be harmful beliefs?
Look, parents have lots of chances, lots of opportunities to inculcate their children with whatever beliefs, values, convictions they want. But what they shouldn't have a right to do is to prevent their children in a school setting, in an educational setting, from being exposed to competing beliefs, to alternatives to the sorts of things that parents want to transmit to their children.
So, look, if I want to teach my kids, suppose it were true, I want to teach my kid that Catholicism is the one true faith. I send them to church every day. I send them to catechism, regularly.
Have at it at home. Do it all you want at home.
But the school comes along and says, "Oh, Catholicism is just one belief among others." That's like the state directly competing with what I'm trying to teach them. Why don't I have the right? If I want to teach my kid that Catholicism is the one true belief, what's the state get off saying? Well, it's just one belief among others.
The state doesn't have to say in the schoolhouse that it's just one belief amongst others, but what it has to say is that people are equal citizens, even if they happen to believe things that you think are false or sinful or worse.
But if I'm a Catholic, won't I send my kid to a Catholic school? And is the state going to interfere with that?
It has certain minimal regulations, even on Catholic schools.
Sure.
Although it allows the Catholic school, unlike a public school, to try and transmit a particular religious belief. And I would be of the opinion that there should be an emphasis placed, even in a Catholic school, even in a private school environment, on insisting that children learn that even if someone's not a Catholic, they're still an equal citizen.
I imagine most Catholic schools do.
I imagine most do
portray that.
But there's something, I think, there's a fundamental issue here, right? And I just want to know how you think about it. John's sort of view was, I'm not quite sure what he thinks it entails, but you could hear it. It's sort of like it entails that parents have a kind of fundamental ethical dominion over their children, and the state has no right to challenge that. This thing you told us in the last segment about how public education came about, basically the state claimed a kind of dominion over children for its own sake. Mm-hmm. That the state claims the parents can't contest. So who has the more fundamental dominion over children? Parents, the state, equal dominion? And why?
Well, the usual way this gets debated is that there are two interests at stake. There's the interest of the parents in rearing their children, the interest of the state in producing good citizens. I think that there's a third interest at stake, and the third interest is the independent interest, the independent standing of the child. So, John, you mentioned before that you think most parents have their best interests of their kids at heart. They want them to learn kinds of things that most schools are going to teach. Now, that's true. But if you happen to be a child and get really unlucky, born into what you described before as a wacko family, shouldn't you feel as a child that you were deserving of a chance to learn non-wacko things that a school would provide?
Before you answer that, one observation. I think every kid thinks they're born into a wacko family. But
and every kid is right. Well, first of all, I want to go back to Ken's flowery language about ethical dominion. I mean, look, when it comes to ethics, almost all parents, whether they're wacko hippies or wacko fundamentalists or wacko wackos, they will teach their kid that stealing is wrong, that lying is wrong, that murder is wrong. Almost all parents, whatever religious persuasion, Catholic schools, Seventh-day Adventist schools, are ethically very similar. Right now, maybe when you get to the shall not covet thy neighbor's wife, you're going to get a lot more emphasis of that in a fundamentalist school than you will in my liberal hippie Montessori school.
What about sexually coveting members of the same gender issue? Not all people think homosexuality is okay or not okay. Some people think homosexuals are some kind of depraved people without the same fundamental rights. I don't think so. I don't think it's true.
But I don't know what you mean by ethical dominion. If the parent somehow has the ability not just to tell the child what he thinks, why he thinks it, to teach him these things, I think they have that right, even if I think the things are false. You're putting it too much in today's issues. When I was a kid in Lincoln, Nebraska, to graduate from the 3rd grade, you had to memorize the 23rd Psalm. You said the Lord's Prayer every day before school, as well as the Pledge of Allegiance. I happen to think all of those things are objectionable. If I'd had a kid in the Lincoln Public Schools, I would have considered taking them out. Well, I wouldn't have, because I'm too damn lazy.
But John, John, what you're saying is that schools aren't perfect and parents aren't perfect.
Exactly.
All right. So why should we risk any one of those agents being set up with all-knowing authority when we know there are going to be imperfections? Have a balance of power. Parents get some authority. The state through the public school gets some authority. Why do you want to go with all parental authority?
Well, I don't know that I want to go with all parental authority. I want to go with basic parental authority. It's the
What's that mean?
It means it's the default. It means you assume that parents are doing a good job raising their kids. You assume in America that they have a right to teach them whatever religion they have. If they have some controversial views about being gay, you have a right to convey that to their kids.
Right, but
you don't suppose that they have a right to prevent their kids from all social intercourse, or that they have a right to enforce things.
Right, but if I grew up in a rural area and my state has a homeschooling law that permits my parents to homeschool me from kindergarten through 12th grade in whatever way they want, they decide who I learn with, what I learn, how long I learn it, what subjects I learn. Maybe there are a few people around me, but perhaps they all believe the same things that you believe as my parent. I feel like, yeah, so strictly speaking, there's no police that are gonna come in and prevent me from hanging out with people nearby. But as a default matter, if I'm that kid, I want a state-supervised curriculum, a regulation that ensures that I learn a couple basic things beyond what my parents
No,
are.
wait a minute. What do you mean by a couple basic things, like reading and writing and arithmetic?
And the fact that there are other people who have fundamentally different beliefs that my parents think are sinful.
Wait, if you had to go to an Amish school, they shouldn't be allowed?
Amish schools should be allowed. They should be subject to state requirements and curriculum.
So can I want to get back to something you said in passing, and I think we need to focus on. Because you said, if I'm a kid, I want, right? Of course, kids are little and not autonomous, but I think there's a fundamental question here, and it goes back to what you call flowery language, John. What is actually the parenting relation? What is the relationship between a parent and a child? You could think, in its worst possible form, I don't know if anybody does think this, but you could think the child is in some sense the property of the parent. And so I have dominion over my children the way I have dominion over my I don't think anybody believes that fully, but I do think some people believe that in some sense the child is the ethical property of the parent.
What's that mean, ethical
that means
property?
I get to shape, without the interference of the state, their fundamental ethical outlook. You could also believe, and this is what I tend to believe, that parents are merely temporary custodians of children, and that children have fundamental rights that are independent of their parents' interests, and that the state, as the protector of us all, has duties to the children to intervene sometimes between them and the
Well, I
parents.
agree with everything you said, except that phrase, the state as the protector of us all. Hey, I mean, come on, this isn't Prussia. This is America. The state isn't the protector of us all. It's the one that sends our kids to war. It's the one that prevents gays from getting married in most states. It's not the protector of us all. It's one more
Look,
corrupt
John,
force in a messy world in which your parents are usually the one thing you can count on being on your side.
John, you paint the state to be this potential tyrant, and you're right that it can be.
Thank you.
Parents are also potential tyrants.
You're certainly right about that.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about education and the culture wars with some passion, as you can hear, in front of a live audience at the Marsh Theater. And we'd like to invite our audience. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm from New York. And it seems like the single best thing that some sort of controversy in a local school district can do is increase involvement in school board meetings, PTA meetings, all those sorts of things. So is it important that controversial issues not be fundamentally resolved one way or the other because of the way they increase involvement across the ideological spectrum in the lives of the kids and in the education system?
Good question. What do you think?
Yeah, the yoga experience going on in Southern California now is a really good example of this. So lots of people thought that the local governance of schools was not merely a good way to organize the educational experience for children, but just as you said, to bring parents and adults in the community into political participation and get them working with each other on controversial issues. So as the thing plays out down in Southern California, that seems to me a sign of the health of local democracy, independent of whatever you think the right position happens to be. The worry is that If you have lots of people withdrawing their kids from public schools and homeschooling them or sending them to private school, then you don't have the same political participation. It's an important thing for a democracy that lots of people, parents and kids, are involved in discussions about public schools.
Right. I mean, it's important that we're talking about, at least in the ideal, a democratic state in which we're all invited to participate. So the state, I mean, I hate it when people talk about the state versus us. I mean, that's a sign of things gone wrong, right? Because that's us disowning the state, and then it's not really a democracy. If we really have a democracy, state's action is somehow through us and through our entitlement to it, our collective entitlement to it. And democratic control of schools is a darn good thing. It's a darn good thing. But I can tell you, Rob, you sound like you're really opposed to homeschooling.
I'm opposed to unregulated homeschooling. I think it's a huge mistake to allow parents the right, or worse, a fundamental right in legal terms, to supervise the education of their children without any check on the parent's authority.
But would you say that the situation is any different with nutrition? I mean, would you say that our policy is that parents have the right to supervise the nutrition of their children without any check by the state?
Sure. Well, so we have a legal framework which permits the state to intervene in cases of abuse or neglect. So far as I'm aware, there's no such legal category of educational abuse or neglect.
In California?
Anywhere, so far as I'm aware. So you cannot say, the state cannot announce to a parent, oh, we see what you're teaching your kids. That amounts to abuse. Doesn't exist so far as I know.
So what is an example of what they're teaching their kids that you would think, like if they taught homosexuality is a sin, would you think that should be deemed an abuse?
Not the mere teaching that homosexuality is a sin, but the failure to also teach that homosexuality doesn't imply anything insofar as your status as a citizen, and that other people believe things that are different. And these days, when we're on the brink of a Supreme Court decision, which might announce gay marriage as, in fact...
Is there some history of litigation? I mean, there's a big history of litigation of children being taken away from parents because they were malnutrition or they were medical. Is there any case where a homeschools...
Whether children have been taken out of homeschooling environments.
Or whether homeschools have been penalized or parents have been penalized or put under court orders because they weren't teaching that homosexuals were citizens.
Well, in most states, there exists no regulation to allow the state to pursue such a course of action. The political activism on the especially fundamentalist Christian part of the homeschool community has been very successful at getting state laws that are very permissive about homeschooling. So,
even a requirement so mild as you can teach whatever wacko religion you want. Probably that isn't the way the legislature would frame it.
No.
But you must, as part of your homeschool curriculum, indicate that
no curricular
other
supervision.
views are possible without giving up.
There's no curricular supervision. There's nothing.
Well, there is in some states.
In some states. In these states where the regulation says parents have the right to homeschool, they don't even need to send a letter to a local public authority announcing that they're homeschooling, much less show that their kids achieved in some minimal standard on a test or show a curriculum to anyone. Nothing.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
Hi, this is Nate from San Francisco. So this is a question. So what precisely are the requirements that you believe that homeschooling parents should have? What are these precise requirements that you're so passionate about?
Number one, I think there should be a curricular requirement that parents should have to produce the curricular materials at the for potential supervision or review by a public authority. It could be just a local official from the school district. And secondly, and I think more importantly, the student who's being homeschooled should have to be subject to the same minimum basic skill testing that kids in public schools are subject to on some occasional basis, say once every 2 years or something. And if over the course of many tests they're shown to be performing at abysmally low rates, that could be a potential sufficient warrant to get their children to be put into a different
I want to get off policy for a second and just more fundamental philosophical things, because I wonder something about what kind of philosophical outlook or view about the state and democracy and all that this follows from. Because one could be a firm advocate, I suppose, of an absolute liberty of conscience. And it sounds like so that people are entitled to whatever sectarian beliefs they want, I, as a parent, am entitled to promulgate to my children whatever sectarian without interference from the state, because the state is not supposed to be regulating conscience, right? But it seems like you want to empower the state, and I wonder what kind of philosophical outlook to do some regulation of the ability of parents to promulgate their conscience.
The state, in my view, the state doesn't need to regulate the things that parents themselves convey to the children, their own children. Parents are free to convey, just as you said, whatever they want. They want to say, look, you marry outside the tribe, dear son or dear daughter, we will disown you and we will not come to your wedding. You do X, Y, or Z and we think you're sinful and we will never have anything to do with you again. Parents are free to do whatever they wish to do in terms of value. But
so absolute liberty of consciousness.
Absolutely. But what parents can't do is prevent their children from being exposed to competing alternatives.
Because why?
It's in the independent interest of the child to be exposed to competing alternatives, in addition to being good for their development as citizens.
I want to ask a question of detail. That is, what do you mean by a child? I mean, in America, we come to mean we have this single all-purpose category: child, 18 or under, minor. But that's a fairly new thing and even in America, we do make distinctions. I would say that I would kind of agree with what you say from about, I don't know, 6th grade on or maybe 5th grade on. Parents should really, whatever their homeschooling are, their kids should be exposed to a variety of views, at least through a peer group of some sort. But I don't know about up to that. I give parents pretty much the right to insulate their kids from other peer groups.
Well, we might be agreeing about something here, John, because at the age of 5 or 6
then
or 7...
Then I take it back!
At the age of 5 or 6 or 7, maybe it is that parents should have a much more significant sway over shielding their kids from exposure to things that they might deem as sinful. It is important for kids to be anchored and rooted in the intimate environment of the family, all the more important at very young ages. But for a 12-year-old, for a 15-year-old, for a 17-year-old to have that same liberty of a parent to prevent their kid from being exposed, I think is a big mistake.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about education and the culture wars with Rob Reich, co-editor of Education, Justice, and Democracy.
In our next segment, some want to amend our U.S. Constitution to guarantee parents fundamental rights to have their children educated as they see fit. Good idea or not such a good idea?
We're coming to you from the Marsh Theater, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance. We'll take more questions from our audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
Ceiling, me proud of shame. Bizarro world, bizarro world, bizarro world. Hello, mean goodbye. Hello.
Thanks to our live musical guest, the Bizarre Tones. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is Rob Reich from Stanford University.
Rob, my understanding about California is that homeschools are not recognized as a category in the law. Parents or groups of parents have the right to establish private schools in their homes. These schools are treated by the state in the same way that other private schools are treated. Whatever curricular requirements there are on private schools, there are on private schools located in homes. Is this a good practical solution, a model for other states, or is just a head in the sand approach to real problems posed by homeschooling?
Yeah, California is a bit idiosyncratic. I'm not a full expert on the lay of the land across all 50 states. Every state has different laws concerning homeschools. In most states, the laws are extremely permissive. They are actual homeschool statutes that permit parents to homeschool their children with often very minimal requirements or no requirements at all. California, as you say, doesn't have a homeschool statute as such. It packages homeschools into this rather awkward category of a private school, where the implication seems to be that there's actually some separate building with a bunch of other students when it's actually, for all intents and purposes, just a homeschool.
There's an amendment proposed. I don't know the details of the amendment, but there's an amendment being proposed to the U.S. Constitution that would give parents like fundamental rights inalienable rights over all aspects, everything related to the upbringing of their children, right, would ward off the state from interfering with that, except in terms of something like national security. I assume you think that's a bad idea.
It's a really bad idea. There's this idea of a parental rights amendment would inscribe into the Constitution, not merely into a law, but the U.S. Constitution, the fundamental right of parents to supervise the upbringing of their children. Now, on the face of it, that sounds pretty mild and unobjectionable. Right. What that means is that if a 15-year-old wanted to access medical treatment that his or her parents wanted the kid not to have, the parents say would be absolutely definitive there. Similarly with schooling arrangements, there would be no chance that a state could announce a competing interest in the education of children.
And that's enshrining, that really would enshrine into the U.S. fundamental law this thing that John didn't like me saying, but I think it's true, that children are ethically subservient entirely to their parents and have no independent standing. As I really think parents are merely the custodians of their children, and that they have an obligation to raise them toward autonomy. And I don't know if the state can force parents to raise their children with an eye toward their future autonomy, because that might interfere with this liberty of conscience thing. But how do you reconcile those two things?
Before we get to that, I don't think what you guys said about this law is quite right.
You have the text.
Yeah, I have the text on my cell phone.
What's it say?
Section 1, the liberty of parents to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children is a fundamental right. Now, you explained to me that fundamental has a meaning,
a particular legal meaning.
Particular meaning.
It's the highest burden possible imposed on the state to curtail a fundamental right or interest.
The second section is neither the U.S. or blah, blah, blah can infringe this right, so it's apparently infringible, without demonstrating that government interest is applied to the person as of the highest order. Then 3, this article shall not be construed to apply to parental action or decision that would end life. So I don't think
that's right. So they're exempting the medical decision case. Yeah. And my guess is that's for strategic purposes, because a sufficiently large proportion of the population.
So if you just water down the first 2 things, forget about the fourth one, which is United Nations paranoia. I must admit it doesn't seem too objectionable to me, and it's probably not a good amendment because it's probably already implicit in the Constitution.
I don't think so. Let's take some questions from our audience here. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
Hi, my name is Devin. I'm from Montreal. And I have a kind of basic question. Rob, you said that public education was a major intrusion into parents' lives. I'm wondering if you can't see it as a boon to parents' lives, family life, freeing the family up to do a whole diversity of things.
Absolutely. I think we've come to see it that way over the course of time. But if you rolled the clock back 150 years, or put it in philosophical terms, if you were trying to describe the proposal of a compulsory attendance law to a libertarian, you said, look, what we want to do is we want to organize taxation to create schools where all children will not merely be permitted to attend at the cost of the U.S. taxpayer, but actually will now have a law that says no parent shall be able to exempt his or her child from attending school. It does seem on the surface of it just a massive intrusion in terms of the hours that a child is taken away from a parent, from the lack of control that's imposed upon a parent.
So that's an interesting perspective, but if it is a massive intrusion that did come in the mid-1800s and was pretty much unopposed, it's not too amazing that some people think there has to be an amendment to set things right, is it?
Well, no, I don't think it's surprising at all that people think a parental rights amendment would be the appropriate corrective. But I think it would be a mistake to do so. Compulsory attendance laws have turned out to be an extraordinarily good thing. Good thing for parents, as the questioner suggested, a really good thing for kids.
You think compulsory attendance laws would violate that amendment?
Well, what a parent would be able to say now under the parental rights amendment is, I'm going to homeschool, and the state doesn't get to supervise any aspect of it. So if I want to keep my kid in the closet at home playing Wii all day long, that's fine.
No, the state would have to demonstrate it had some interest. I don't think it would have too much trouble in that.
No, I don't think that's right. I don't think you're right. You're reading your wishes into the language of the
Why do you think I'm reading my wishes into it?
Well, because it says it shall not... The parents have a fundamental right to all aspects relating to the rearing of their children. It doesn't say, except for these or those. It doesn't make any exceptions. It says a fundamental right.
That's not true. It says it can be infringed by the state if it shows a legitimate interest. I think a legitimate interest in having all kids read, write, do arithmetic.
It has to meet this it has to compete with the fundamental right of parents.
Let's get rid of the fundamental.
Well, that's a different amendment. Let's take some questions from our audience. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
Hi, Stephen Davis from San Jose. How would you respond to a conservative or fundamentalist parent who would say that showing students varying viewpoints, even given equal airtime, would be tantamount to liberal indoctrination.
Why do you pick out fundamentalist parents? Why not just parents who think that other points of you don't think there are liberals who think that other points of view or
no, but I think there's a lot of also even economic conservatives that would say that
or we could think of the Marin liberal haven which wants to exempt their children from vaccines because they have some view that the lead preservative causes autism
or people that live in Chicago and think that Ayn Rand is the gospel.
Look, there are lots of people who think the dominant culture, they want to exempt themselves and their kids from the dominant culture. And the question is, what do we as a democratic polity expect of each other? What do we require for the education of children? Look, the state, Rawls talks about the ethos of a people. We, in constituting the state, and if you're going to be a member of the state, we have a right as the state, as this collectivity of which you choose to be part of, to try and inculcate an ethos of respect for the institutions of the state. Parents don't have that responsibility.
Well, you sound like Rousseau to me, but I'm not a Rousseauian. I don't think of the state as some big thing that I join. I think the state is a mountain that we can peck away at and make a more wonderful mountain out of it. But it's there. It's always going to be there. And we don't have a people. We have Amish. We have Mennonites. We have Christians. We have Jews. We have all kinds of people.
I want to try and give a quick answer to the question, though, because I at least don't want to be seen as being dismissive or not even able to understand what I think is very frequently the view of a let's just say a Christian conservative here, who says by exposing my children to these competing beliefs that I think are sinful, it's a really, really harmful thing for my ability as a parent.
For your small children, we
small
agree,
children.
up till fifth grade.
Older children. So on the one hand, it may well be the case from the standpoint of the parent that they have this religious conviction that insists that the transmission of the religious convictions they have to their children is of paramount importance. And when they fail to do so, the eternal damnation of the child, as well as for the parent, is at stake. Now, that's a pretty big harm.
And moreover, don't you remember the last campaign and a certain Republican who was running for president who sounded like he was running for the Pope or something? That was Rick Santorum, who said about you send your kids off to college, you get these liberal professors teaching you about multiculturalism, all this sort of stuff. He thought, that's doing fundamental. Don't go to college. I mean, there are tons of people in this thing who really do want to do what Rob is suggesting. And I think the democratic state has an interest in that not being the case.
Well, I think we need to deconstruct what you said. Rick Santorum is a good example of how we don't know things that, in your view, and I probably agree, we should know. He's not, therefore,
That's called the state regulation. Then.
Yes, he's not, therefore, a good example of because he homeschooled and he criticized and he was a presidential candidate and he's a homophobic jerk, therefore he exemplifies all the things you're worried about. We have no evidence he exemplifies any of the things that you're worried about.
Your beef is with Ken, then.
Except that he said don't go to college because you expose to these liberal professors and their democratic liberalism. But let's take a question from our audience.
I'm Allison. I'm from San Francisco. I've been having a debate recently with one of my family members who does not believe in evolution and doesn't necessarily feel that it should be taught as fact in school, whereas I do believe in evolution and I have no problem with it being taught as fact. But I think this debate that we've had has brought to light the fact that it is a very relative question, and I'm sure that this person was taught with her best interests at heart when she was taught that evolution was simply a theory. Mm-hmm. And my question here is there any mechanism to really objectively evaluate the curriculum of the prevailing society in terms of either ethics or how valid it is as a truth? And perhaps is that sort of what the public education system's purpose is to simply integrate children into the popular tome or whatever is going to enable them to function within that society, whether or not it's ethical or true or going to be replaced in the future with something that may be completely different.
Look, I think that debate that school is having is a healthy debate. You said this. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's democratic deliberation about what we should do together. And what should we avail ourselves of in democratic deliberation about what we should do together? Everything at our disposal. Science, economics, politics, philosophy, everything at our disposal. There's nothing, that it's messy, that walks this way, then walks that way. That's democracy. There's a symphony of democracy. My only claim is, and I think that this should be part of the democratic deliberation about what we should do together. Not that there's any set answers. Science gets overthrows itself all the time. I don't think evolution is going to be overthrown by creation science, but I wouldn't object to people teaching creation science as a possible hypothesis and then hammering it with all the ways and means of scientific inquiry. That's the noise of democracy. That's the noise of collective reasoning.
Oddly enough, I agree with Ken on this. I just point out, if you look into contemporary physicists and what they tell us, these are scientists that everybody respects. They're like gods. And what do they say? They say things like, time is just a subjective myth. There's no real time in physics. So does that mean that everything we teach kids about time in school is just a theory that happens to work? Well, maybe it does. So if evolution has the same status as time, and saying that will satisfy the...
But you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I think the rough idea here would be that you approach things like the statement about time or things about evolution as, well, they're potentially falsifiable theories. Yeah. But that the preponderance of evidence in different cases points to reasons to have a strongly held conviction that it happens to be true. Well, it's open to future falsification.
I think the preponderance of evidence says that physicists must be wrong about time. But I don't have time.
You have no time to establish that.
This has been among the more intense philosophy talks we've ever had. So we're going to have to give it a close here. Our guest has been Rob Reich. He's a professor of political science and ethics and society from Stanford University. He's co-editor of Education, Justice, and Democracy. And Rob, thanks so much for joining us and for getting John Stanford.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
This conversation continues on our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org, where our motto is cogito ergo blogo. I think, therefore I blog. You can also follow our tweets on Twitter, and you can find out more by visiting our very active Facebook page.
Our 62nd philosopher, Ian Scholes, experienced his own culture wars at school, but he survived. He lived to tell a tale, and now he's going to tell it.
Ian Scholes. As an undergraduate, I had been active in the theater, so I was familiar with gay men. The theater was a safe haven for gay men. Unlike real estate, say, banking, or the armed services, I hadn't had any contact with lesbians until grad school. I quickly theorized there were two different kinds of lesbians: the aesthetic lesbian and the political lesbian. The aesthetic lesbian, I knew, was called Mary, with an I-E. She was very funny, with dyed blonde hair, an affected accent, and nails chewed to the quick. She was in a comp lit class I was taking. Postmodernism was the modern thing, so what we were reading was up for grabs. Chaucer, the Sears catalog, some action thriller, and whatever ephemera we thought to bring to class. I brought in a story from one of the free campus weeklies put out by political lesbians. There was a story in it that contained this sentence: "If you've never been attracted to a fat lesbian, it's no accident." Nowadays, of course, no such article would use such a culturally loaded term as fat. At the time, it was clearly intended as an indictment of sexism, stereotypes, and so forth, but I found myself wondering, well, even if I were attracted to a fat lesbian, what good would it do me? There was a political lesbian in the writing class I was taking. She was a very slight woman with short-clipped hair and wire-frame glasses. She had a very pleasant-speaking voice, which she used to tyrannize the men in the class. We couldn't write about women because we weren't women, and if we wrote about men, it only reinforced what she believed about men writers. I wound up not writing anything, simply out of the fear that she might wind up reading it and calling me a fascist. I was lucky she was thin, and I wasn't attracted to her. Mary spent a lot of time, as so many of us did, drinking bad coffee in the student union. A bunch of us would hang out, yakking it up and avoiding work. And once one of her aesthetic lesbian friends sat with us, and Mary announced that she wanted to kiss her. She asked me I demonstrate. They proceeded to engage in a long French kiss, clearly staged for the benefit of the rest of the table. She didn't want to shock or titillate. She just wanted to make sure we knew she was a lot more exotic than the girls back home and sensual as all get out. Well, one time I was sitting with Mary when this same aesthetic lesbian friend sat down at the table and announced, "I had my first menage a trois last night." Now, frankly, I didn't know how to respond. Congratulations? Did Hallmark have a card for that? Well, they probably do now, and if they don't, it's no accident. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University. Copyright 2013.
Our executive producer is David Demarest. Music from Merle Kessler, Amy Kessler, and Joshua Raoul Brody, the Playtons.
Special thanks to Chris Meyer and Stephanie Weissman. Thanks also to Dan Brandon, Caitlin Esch, Jenny Cataldo, Crystal Nickerson, James Hanley, Nabila Abdullah.
The program is produced by Devin Strolovich. Laura McGuire is our Director of Research. Dave Millar is our Director of Marketing. Carola Kreitmar is our Performance Consultant.
Support for Philosophy Talks comes from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk,
and from the members of KALW Local Public Radio, San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
Not even when they're true and reasonable. The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.